Hey, it's Carrie from Lovely Etc. and today I want to show you how to make this super budget-friendly, modern geometric wood plank wall. And I also have written detailed printable instructions over on my website if you want to check those out as well. This wall behind me is the wall that I am working on. This used to be my kids' nursery and I had painted a really cool mural on that wall of a starry sky and it said "Dream Big." And I really love that mural, but now I'm turning this room into my office slash crafting DIY space, and the mural just didn't really fit anymore. I do have a whole tutorial on my website if you're interested in seeing how I painted the mural to begin with, but now I painted over it and I'm ready to do something different. So after considering all kinds of different designs that I could use for my wood accent wall, I came up with a design that's sort of a combination between shiplap and one of the more modern geometric walls that usually uses skinny trim. Kind of mashed those together to make a design. It was also inspired by the herringbone wood wall that I installed in our bathroom, and I'm really excited about the vision I have, and I hope that it turns out the way that it looks in my head. For my design, I'm going for something sort of complicated, and I didn't want to just wing it because I wanted to make sure it ended up looking balanced and basically just good. So I used a computer program to mock up several different options. Canva is a really good program to use for this. And then I just chose the one that I liked the best. And I printed it out, and this is the design that I am going for on the wall. And as I'm putting it up, if it starts to look weird, I can always change it on the fly. But I really like having a plan from the beginning. So for this wood wall project, I wanted wood that was first of all really cheap, and second of all very lightweight since I'm going to be hanging it on the wall. So I chose this inexpensive plywood. This is called Revolution ply. I got it from Lowe's. It's typically used as like a floor underlayment or in places where it's not really going to be seen. It does not have a pretty wood grain. It's sort of flimsy, which is great for us because that means it's lightweight. You can also buy planks of wood so you don't have to go to the trouble because it is kind of a hassle ripping down a big board into smaller planks. The downside to buying pre-cut wood planks is that one, they're going to be much heavier because it's going to be a thicker, higher quality wood, and two, it's going to be much more expensive. But if you want to save time and not have to worry about making your own planks, that's definitely an option. I cut my underlayment plywood into 4-inch wide planks, and I did it using a circular saw. Just for ease. You can also use a table saw, but I found it's really difficult to maneuver big sheets of plywood onto a table saw, especially by yourself. Sometimes I'll cut it into smaller pieces and then cut it up, but this time I needed a long plank, so a circular saw worked really well. Before I start nailing anything on the wall, I am going to mark the studs. This wood is lightweight enough, it doesn't have to be attached into a whole bunch of studs, but it's always going to be more secure to be attached to at least some studs for each board. Side note, this is my favorite stud finder because it's just a big magnet. You run it over the wall, and when it gets to either a metal stud or a wood stud with metal screws, it sticks. There's no beeping. I find that the other stud finders just do not work and give me false positives all the time. So this guy is super handy. I'm attaching my boards to the wall using my nail gun. I have a Ryobi airstrike nail gun, which I like because you don't have to have an air compressor. I'm not using any kind of glue to attach them, simply because I like to be able to remove an accent wall in the future if my style changes or I decide I want to do something different. I've done quite a few plank walls, never used glue for that very reason, and they've always stayed up fabulously. So that's what I'm doing this time too. I'm starting with a section of long horizontal strips of wood, so I measured to make sure they were at the height that I wanted, and then used a level to make sure that they were level, and then just started attaching them. And these first long strips, it really is helpful to have somebody else around that can just help you hold them in place as you get started. As you continue adding boards to your design, you want to try to maintain the same amount of space in between each strip of wood. And sometimes in the past, I've used nickels or dimes or pennies in between each board to act as spacers. This time around, I mostly just eyeballed it and it worked fine. But you want to try to leave just a little space in between each board so that it maintains that nice plank wall texture. After the horizontal strips, I started moving into the angled pieces, which make up most of the wall. It really works best to cut each of these angles individually and measure them individually, which is what is so time consuming. But because most people's walls and floors and ceilings are not perfectly square, you really need to measure and cut each piece on its own. And you can easily cut your angles just using a miter saw and then move them into place and attach them. There were a couple of spots on my wall where I needed to work around outlets or light switches, and for those areas I just made a template and then used a jigsaw to cut out around where the outlet would be.
So as I continued working on the wall, I just worked on one section at a time, and I would hold each board in place, use my speed square or straight edge to mark exactly the angle where it needed to be cut, and then cut it with my miter saw and attach it. And yes, it was pretty time consuming, but because of that extra work of measuring each piece individually, every single piece fit exactly right and turned out beautiful.
Okay, my wood is finally in place, and yes, it took way longer than I had hoped, but it's done now, and I think it looks amazing. And now I'm going to get it ready for paint. You could leave it just like this with the natural wood showing and even try to stain it, but I knew I wanted to paint mine from the beginning, and I didn't use wood that has a particularly nice wood grain, so I think it's going to look much better paint. If you want your wall to have a wood look to it, I would use a little bit of a nicer plywood instead of this really cheap plywood that I used. Birch plywood would probably work well. You can still get 1/4 inch thick. It just costs a little bit more. So if you're painting, why pay more for a nice wood grain when it's not even going to show?
Before I start painting, I'm using some spackling to fill in all of the nail holes just to give a nice, really smooth finish. And this is super simple. You just add it on, let it dry for, a few minutes, and then you can sand it off with 220 grit or higher sandpaper for a really smooth finish. Then be sure to wipe down your wall well just to get rid of all the dust before you start painting. I'm painting my wall with a small foam paint roller. This is my top choice of how to paint anything that has a pretty smooth surface, including furniture and plank walls. And I'm also using a paintbrush just to get into the corners. The main thing to keep in mind when you're painting a plank wall like this or even shiplap is that you really don't want to push down very hard with your roller. Anytime you're painting, you shouldn't have to push down very hard. But it's especially important when you're painting a plank wall because you don't want paint to squish into all those nice grooves that you've created in between your planks and gum it up and just make it look messy. So you want to roll the paint on lightly. If it starts to feel like maybe you need to push down harder, that really just means that you need to load up a bit more paint onto your paint roller. And for most paint colors, you can expect to need to do 2 full coats of paint to get really nice even coverage. And if you're doing a really pure white or a really bright red or dark paint color, you may even need to do 3 coats. If you do notice that you've gotten some paint dripping down into the cracks between your planks of wood, the best way I found to take care of it is to grab a spare piece of sandpaper or cardstock. I happen to have some sandpaper nearby from when I was sanding off the spackling, and just gently slide it between the planks wherever the paint is, and then you have a nice clean line again. And here's my wall all painted. It's looking great, but there is one final thing to take care of, and that is if you install a plank wall on a wall where there are electrical outlets or light switches, then you need to do something to help make them flush with the wall again, because you've added thickness to the wall. So if you don't do anything, your electrical outlets and light switches are going to be recessed. Fixing this is really simple. You can get little plastic spacers from any home improvement store. Of course, make sure that you turn off the power before you start working on this, but this doesn't require any actual wiring. You're just slipping the spacers in behind the screws and then re-screwing the outlets in so that they are just a little bit further out than they were before. For my own wall, I had a second problem, and that is that even once I had my outlets even with the wall, there was still the issue that I have ugly, beige, dingy outlets and light switches from when our house was originally built in the 1970s, and they just really didn't look that great against my new, fresh, bright plank wall. I have replaced outlets before, and honestly, I just didn't want to fool with that because it's kind of a pain. So instead, this time I decided to try out these outlet covers and light switch covers that you can put right over your old outlets, and they work the same as they ever did, but it covers up the old dingy outlet without having to actually rewire it and replace it. And so far, I'm really happy with how extremely easy it was to install these, and I think they look great.
And finally, my geometric wood wall is done. In the end, I'm really glad that I did stick with my original idea and paint the wall because it looks great. You can definitely still see the pattern of the planks, and I just like the subtlety of the wood. It's not quite so in your face, and to me, it just strikes the perfect balance. Okay, so how much money did it cost and how long did it take? I did not keep track of the hours that I spent on the wall because it was spread out over several weeks. I had a lot of other stuff I was working on and trying to get done at the same time, but I will say it took a long time, maybe I have no idea. Definitely more than 10 hours, I would say. So very time intensive. I've done a similar herringbone wood wall in my bathroom, and it was much faster because there weren't all of the different angles and lengths. Everything was cut to the same size. Also done other plank walls in the past that were much faster. Just the combination of all of the custom sized pieces and angles made this take way longer. But in the end, I still feel like it was worth it this one time. As far as the cost, that was a win because it was super cheap. For all of the wood for my wall, plus paint, it came in at less than $100. In the end, I think that this geometric wood wall is worthy of painting over the beautiful Starry Night nursery mural that was here before. It's a totally different look, obviously, but I think it's going to be perfect for my office, possibly a kid's bedroom in the future. For pretty much any space, this wall is going to look great. It's neutral enough, but still has lots of personality that it could go in almost any type of room with almost any type of decor. If you haven't yet, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel, Lovely Etc., where I share lots of inexpensive DIY ideas for creating a home that you love.